My name is Nave. I've been on the faculty of the physics department for 50 years. Came here in 1968. It'd be associate professor emeritus now, so I have been out of the classroom for 3 years, even though I've done some volunteer work with laboratories. I was recruited from North Wales, where I was doing a postdoctoral fellowship, and beginning in '67, I got the letter from Dr. Joe Hadley here, and we went through the recruitment process. Molecular spectroscopy is something that you could get underway for probably $15,000, which is a lot of money at that time, but we were able to get a grant to build the spectrometer, and so he was trying to build real research areas that wouldn't break the bank because we were a college that time, we were not, a university. So we just had a master's degree program at that time. My office was in Kell Hall from '68 until probably early '90s, like 1991, when we moved to Science Annex. Room 514B, that's the office I moved into in 1968, and I occupied that for over 20 years. Most of the classes and laboratories were also on that floor. It was kind of unusual to come in and find these heavy ramps moving up to the 5th floor, but I was excited enough about being here that it was fine with me. The 5th floor of Kell Hall really was a good environment for a small science department. We had only 6 faculty members when I came. I was the 7th. So all of our teaching and research was carried out there on the 5th floor of Kell Hall. We had our research laboratories, classrooms. One of the laboratories was directly across from my office. The 2 classrooms were very close as well, and we had machine shop and all the support facilities for our research laboratories. My research was in molecular spectroscopy, determining the structure of molecules. So I determined bond lengths and angles of molecules by sending microwave radiation down a waveguide and analyzing the absorption frequencies. You could actually determine bond lengths and angles to 4 significant digits. The second research initiative that I took was with electron spin resonance, determining the properties of ions of molecules. And in that laboratory, we had 2 huge magnets that were well over a ton apiece. And so there we had no problem about getting them up to that floor because everything was so solid. We didn't have to worry about overstraining the floors or worried about positioning 2 one-ton magnets within about 20 feet of each other. We had the laboratories and the classrooms right there on that floor. Then we could walk right around to our research lab. It was easy to take students to our research labs. We did our instructional laboratories there for our advanced students, and we could build things there because we had very good shop support. We had an excellent machine shop. We still have an excellent machine shop, but it was there on Kell Hall through those early 20 years or so. Probably most of the departments moved out in the late 80s and 90s, early 90s, but during the years of the 70s and 80s, we had the physics department on the 5th floor, we had geology on the 4th floor, chemistry on the 6th floor, we had some biology offices down on the 3rd, so we were in close proximity to all those basic science programs, and that continued for probably 20 years. We did get some problems, say from the chemist in the research program. They would have a crystal that we would analyze by our electron spin resonance, but probably more cooperation in the instructional area. And so at some point, we developed an interdisciplinary science course where I taught alongside a geologist, a biologist, a chemist, and myself, plus astronomy. We moved astronomy into that building in the early 70s. The first astronomer was Dick Miller, I think, who was hired in probably 1971. But it certainly was a solid building, and there are lots of stories, and one of the most famous stories that we used in teaching was we dropped a crockery jug of mercury on the 5th floor, and it burst, and the mercury swirled down the ramps. I'm not sure this is a true story. It may be entirely apocryphal, but everybody in the physics department knows it. So we used it in instruction because mercury having nearly zero friction, we could ask our students, what's the velocity of the mercury when it gets to the ground floor of Kell Hall, assuming that it had no friction, and would, even if it swirled down the ramps, it would still have the same velocity as a free fall when it reached the ground floor. Yes, Robert Hankler was an outstanding member of the faculty, and I'd been a colleague of his for 28 years. In 1995, he was teaching in 519 Kell, and my office was just like 3 doors down from that. So I would often talk to him when he was on his way to class. But in, I think, October of 1995, he had a heart attack in front of his class and basically died in front of the class. One student tried to give him CPR, but it didn't work. So that affected me, of course. He was a friend of mine. I knew his family. I had known his 2 sons basically since their birth. So it was a great blow to us. But the next class, I wound up in front of that class, which is a very eerie experience, because to walk in front of a class whose professor had died in front of the class the previous time. So we both struggled through it, I and the class, but within a week or so, I assured them that I would use my best judgment to carry on the class in the way that Bob would have done it. And so we continued the rest of the term. Teaching became more and more important to me as time progressed. My research was so specialized that it just did not take off. It did not become a very big project. And I found myself very interested in course development. So I wound up being probably the course development specialist for the department, developed several courses. And in the process, we developed a course called Conceptual Physics that we had no real model for. We created that course, and teaching those who would be teaching middle school or high school physics, I found out that there was just no way you could cover it in the time we had, and so I began to dream of a tool that would be useful to them while they were working, that they could access. And fortunately, we were just entering the computer age at that time, even though the first inklings of the thing that became hyperphysics was way back in the very early 80s, which is the dawn of the computer age. We were just putting computers into the laboratory. But as I developed that project, the capability of the computers also grew. And so it was a very fortunate set of circumstances that as I developed the project, the tools became more sophisticated, and we were able to continue to develop it.